Welcome to Hampton III Gallery and Merton Simpson's exhibition. It's been 2 years in the making. About 2 years ago, I went up to New York and started exploring some of his work in this gallery. The more I explored, the more interesting his work became. The earliest works that we're seeing right here were done in '56. This early one is done in '53. Merton was doing these wonderful color form abstract works when all of the wonderful abstract expressionist artists in New York were working. I was amazed the more that I researched that he was on the cutting edge. He was one of the pioneers in this movement. But many of these works were not explored because they'd been sitting in the gallery for years. Merton was concerned about dealing in African sculpture, and so his paintings were a little bit on the sideline. So it's been a thrill to bring them, yes, to South Carolina, where Merton started. Red poem, Merton said at one time, was his love of the sunset. And having been born in Charleston, South Carolina, Merton was so familiar with the sea and the sunsets and the brilliant landscapes of the sea at night. And so these three works to me are just very important early works of Merton's. And then we move in to somewhat gestural works, these works of the '60s, still being influenced by the sea. But by that time, Merton had already moved from Charleston. He was in New York. So these two small works are also influenced by the sea. So I think that Charleston was in the heart of Merton for many, many years. '60s, and these actually have some collage. The small one has collage in it. He was good friends with Romare Bearden, and he also calls him Romy, his friend. So I am wondering if Romare didn't have some influence on the collage part of Merton Simpson's compositions. Now, one of the major works in the exhibition is the next one that we're going to talk about. This, to me, is Charleston for Merton. Merton told me that he would often go down to the sea, watch the boats come in. And even though I would consider Merton an abstract expressionist, you definitely see some figurative work, some figurative elements like the sailboat in this particular work. There's also a lot of texture, collage going on in here too. This piece is a very important early work, and I think directly related to the Charleston experience. And if you could see the surface of the quality of the paint surface on the canvas, it's turbulent. And you can see those waves and the turbulent weather that he experienced in Charleston affecting him in this one. This painting, another collage, and a very important piece in my view, 1966. The title is Victim. It's going to be a work that's going to segue into the major series that Merton's going to do called Confrontation in the 1960s. And if you take a close look, you'll see the word freedom going on in here. Of course, Merton was dealing with the Harlem race riots at that time and all the conflict that was going on during the '60s. And Merton is going to put his signature orange red in there. And this dramatically is going straight across the canvas so that you can't miss it. From the 1963 painting, we come into this series, which is the 1960s. Mid-60s going to '69, there's one that's '72, and it's the confrontation pieces, which I think could be the pivotal point in Merton's career. He was influenced by the Spiral Group. At that time they were dealing with the confrontations of the civil rights movement, and so Merton took these and he did his own interpretation. I think coming out of abstract expressionism, the gestural quality in these, the strong graphic quality. I also see influences with the African sculpture too, the mask-like qualities. The painting behind me, I chose to put in the center of the gallery, and the focal point of the confrontation is probably the most graphic one that I have on display. As you can see, a strong example of the two faces coming at conflict with each other. But as Merton told me in the New York apartment, He said, I was trying to have people see that we didn't have to fight, that we could literally come together and be one. If you look straight on, you can see that one face. So the interpretation and the goal that I think Merton wanted was not the fighting, but the coming together in peace. So we see everything from a strong abstraction down here with the confrontation to the graphic piece in the middle that I mentioned, and coming over here to other pieces. And so from the late 1960s paintings, we're going to go into the early 1980 paintings, which are the jazz series. You're going to see such a total difference as far as palette and even this total optimism. The diagonal lines are no longer confrontation lines. They're lines having to do with music, melodies. Merton loved to play the saxophone, and jazz music was a passion of his. And so he took his love of music and went right into the visual, into the painting. I can just imagine him in the studios with his music on or with melodies in his head. And just taking the paint and improvising on the surface. So these work beautifully together as a series. I was curious about a few of them. This one is called Crying Animal, and I still have to ask Merton about what he means about that, but we get the still the sounds and the vocal here in his compositions. Later on in the work, you get back into the dark palette near the end of this series, which looks like it could have come from the early 60s. And so now we turn the corner and we're seeing works from the 1990s. These are collages, and it was actually the collages that led me to New York, to Merton's studio. All throughout the 90s and a little bit into the 80s, I would make trips down to Charleston, to William Halsey's studio, and I'd see these amazing collages. Come to find out, the rags, the African cloth, had been shipped down to William from Merton. And so now the student was having an influence on his teacher. So in some ways, these collages bring me back full circle down to Merton's influence even in Charleston with William Halsey and that connection. So that's where we're in the exhibition, and it just seems right that Merton's collages should come back to South Carolina, here at Hampton III Gallery. So to me, Merton never truly lost his voice. He never totally changed into a totally different approach to art. He constantly kept his own voice throughout all the decades, whether he was dealing with the early color form pieces or the confrontation pieces or the jazz pieces, and even into the compositions with the collages. It's Merton Simpson, it's his signature, and it's such a privilege to be able to show it here in Greenville, South Carolina.